I'd like to turn now to my colleague Maisha Draves, who is going to host the next session. Maisha is the Medical Director for Pharmacy in Northern California for the Permanente Medical Group. In this role, she collaborates with the chair of the Regional Pharmacy and Therapeutics Committee on Formulary and Pharmacy Policy, and with the Drug Information Services Group on the strategies related to drug shortages and recalls. She provides oversight for pharmacy-related research and develops strategies for Kaiser Permanente's Northern California's drug utilization management efforts. She received her medical degree from Harvard Medical School, and she has been a frequent contributor to the Institute's work on these issues. Maisha, it is good to see you, and I will throw it to you.
Thank you, Murray. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining today. We have a great set of panelists here today that we're going to hear from in a moment. But before I introduce them, I'd like to paint a picture to hold in your mind, which drives home why we're here today. In 2020, Trikafta was a new breakthrough medication in cystic fibrosis. The Northwest Kaiser Permanente published data revealing drastic reductions in hospitalizations. We absolutely applaud everyone from funding and research through manufacturing. And in 2020, we are still waiting for equal levels of funding and resources dedicated to finding a profound breakthrough treatment in sickle cell anemia. In other words, this holiday, during this pandemic, there is a young white patient with cystic fibrosis home with their family because of Trikafta and safe from the pandemic with this fabulous breakthrough. And at the exact same time, today, during this pandemic, we have a young Black patient laying in the hospital with a sickle cell anemia crisis, alone because of hospital visitor policies during this pandemic. They are waiting for this conversation today and waiting for the actions of this audience to follow. Please hold that picture in mind as our panelists today have so much to offer on how we can change that image going forward. I now have the pleasure of introducing our three incredible panelists who will walk us through how systemic racism is playing out in pharmaceutical research and investment in the public, private, and charitable sectors, and who will give us actionable solutions we can take today to eliminate inequities. First, we will hear from Dr. Hannah Valentine, who is a professor of medicine at the Stanford University School of Medicine, and who is recently retired from her position as the inaugural Chief Officer for Scientific Workforce Diversity at the National Institutes of Health. Among her many accomplishments at NIH, she helped to implement transformative diversity programs that significantly increase the representation of women, African Americans, and Latinos in tenured-track investigator positions, in addition to increasing female representation in NIH leadership. Next, we will hear from Dr. Rojelio Mejia, who is an assistant professor of infectious diseases and pediatrics at the National School of Tropical Medicine in Baylor College of Medicine. Through his laboratory's work, he is dedicated to improving the understanding and treatment of parasitic infections through advancing systems of their diagnoses. Dr. Mejia is committed to decreasing the prevalence and burden of these parasites, which disproportionately impact poor and minority populations. And finally, we will hear from Ulili Onovakpuri, who is a partner at Kapor Capital, an early-stage social impact venture capital firm that invests in gap-closing startups. Prior to her role at Kapor, Ulili served as the director of global programs at Village Capital, a global accelerator program and venture capital firm where she worked side by side with entrepreneurs from around the world to help them grow their ideas into marketable businesses. Please welcome all three of our panelists. We are so excited to have them, and we will start with Dr. Hannah Valentine. So Dr. Valentine, please tell us a bit about what brought you into this work, and from where you sit, what the most important issues are when it comes to systemic racism in the pharmaceutical investment and funding.
So thank you very much, Dr. Davis, for that lovely introduction. I would just say that I am driven to this work because of my own personal experience of a sense of not belonging. I grew up in the Gambia until the age of 13, and then my parents moved to England, where I found myself to be the only student of color in a high school of 500 students. And so I really felt not belonging. It was a height of racialism in England, and my academics suffered. And thanks to good mentoring, I got back on track. So really, as I see it, there are a number of key issues here. One is the need for an integrated approach that institutions can take. I think we've all done this work of diversity and inclusion from the perspective of the individual, giving the individual more tools, where we have forgotten this impact of systemic racism. So I think we really need to focus a lot on that, and that will require an institutional approach with a systems approach to things, which is bolstered by more transparency, and most of all, measuring diversity and inclusion metrics and tying the behaviors that we want to see to the institutional systems across the board. And so I really do think that one of the key issues about the root cause is structured around power. You know, no matter what system we look at, we see this disadvantage of people of color, regardless of the field. And this is rooted, now we all realize, in the history of racism and white supremacy, not only actually in this country, but worldwide, led to the issue of caste. And that systematically sustains both the personal racism that people like myself experience, but also the systems that support this ongoing racism that lead to those health disparities that really so vividly described for us in the medicine system. And as a consequence, we need a lot more work to do with regards to solutions, which I think is another question that will come up there. So that's what I see as the key issues, the systemic systems across the board that supports racism and that leads to this disadvantaging of people of color in every single field that has been mentioned here, including the medicine system. And I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Dr. Valentine. So Dr. Mejia, please talk to us more about the barriers that we face, especially with neglected diseases today.
All right. Thank you so much for having me speak and for the wonderful introduction. And so my background is in tropical medicine. I'm an infectious disease certified physician, born in Michigan, but my entire family is from Mexico, which comes in handy when you're speaking Spanish and you live in Texas, because I do spend about 25% of my time seeing patients. And many of the things that were discussed earlier about the sickle cell disease with the African American or the person of color, we see that at the general hospital, where there is definitely a disparity in people of color getting the best care we can provide, but it's definitely not the same as someone who goes to a private hospital. So I was born in Michigan, learned Spanish first, actually. Then went to the NIH, National Institute of Health, where I did my clinical fellowship. And there I practiced my tropical medicine and perfected it. Once I left and I came to Baylor College of Medicine, we started noticing all these tropical diseases that I normally see in places like Ecuador and Guatemala, in places like Mozambique, where they're resource limited. So we expect to find poor sanitation, we expect to find parasites and morbidity due to these neglected diseases. What I was shocked to find is how many parasites we found here in the U.S. And my boss is Peter Hotez, who many probably know through his work right now in the COVID vaccine and COVID vaccination promotion. But his main work is on tropical diseases. So my work was first in Alabama, and then where we found up to 30% of African Americans who had poor sanitation also had this very troublesome parasite called hookworm that can cause anemia and cause other problems. We also did a study in New York City with the 5 boroughs, and we found that the Bronx, which is the poorest of all the boroughs, has the highest amount of Toxocara, one of the parasites that Priti mentioned earlier, in the soil. And so these children are higher exposure rates than, let's say, Manhattan. We also did a study in Texas, and we saw, and these are natural people born in the U.S., and they are getting exposed to these parasites. One of the problems that we have been seeing is, since I've been at Baylor, we've applied for 10 federal grants, including the CDC, the NIH, and the NSF, and we've never received any of them because mostly what was spoken earlier, that they don't know that this is a problem in the U.S., and up to 10% of us in the U.S. can have these parasites. So luckily we've had small donations through different foundations that help us just do a skeleton crew and try to get some of these answers. And I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. Next, Ulili, please tell us more about how you got into this work and the issues that you are seeing today.
Sure. So thank you, first of all, for having me. I know in the introduction you started off by saying Dr. Onovakpuri. I was like, yes, my dad would be happy. Someone actually called me that, although I am not, much to his dismay, a doctor. I started this, and my interest in healthcare came out of, my personal experience. Listening to Priti, so much of what she said resonated with me. And, I think my first interaction, with the pharmaceutical industry, when I was in high school, I had went on a school trip to Ghana. I came back and I had malaria. And, we went to the pharmacy. We had Medi-Cal, and they wouldn't cover, the higher cost drug. And so they gave me the lower cost drug, which wasn't effective. I ended up being in the hospital for a week. And so to me, the disparity, the disparity that exists there, they could have spent, and I still to this day remember $21 to cover that versus, a week in the hospital, which I'm sure cost them 10, if not 100 times more than that. And so at that moment, I realized, hey, the system does not make sense. There's something in this system that is broken, and I wanted to be a part of making that change. So for us at Kapor Capital, we do what Priti mentioned, even though she made up the word, I was like, I'm going to steal this. It's that culturally competent innovation. So we're investing in companies that address disease states that disproportionately affect low-income communities and our communities of color. So that is our focus in the healthcare sector. And even though we don't specifically or only invest in Black and Brown entrepreneurs, what we have found is that oftentimes those are the individuals who are creating businesses, solutions based on their own personal experience. The issue that we have found is that because of historical disenfranchisement, because of disparities in generational wealth, and because of the high cost of drug development as well as just general development in the health tech space, that we are not seeing near as many the numbers of entrepreneurs in the healthcare ecosystem of color that we see in, say, the education or the financial sector. So for us, a big thing is, I worked there was an article that just came out with the California Healthcare Foundation is how do we bridge that gap so that entrepreneurs, scientists, those who are creating these innovations receive the funding at the initial stages in order to bring these solutions to market and address the needs that, I feel like COVID just has brought more visible to all of our eyes, seeing the racial disparity that exists in the COVID diagnosis as well as the morbidity and mortality. So that is what we do at Kapor Capital.
Thank you so much to all of our panelists. Now that you've heard some introductions from each, we're starting to monitor the chat room. We'll start with a few questions, and really this should build off of one another. So I'll start with Dr. Valentine with a couple of questions, and I invite everyone to please also join in and build off of one another. So, Dr. Valentine, if you can please start us off, I'd like to understand more about what you really think are the most major issues that we need to understand in order to begin to develop solutions to address this today.
Yes, thanks for that very important question. From my perspective, having worked at a leadership level at a university, top university, where we grow the talent for all of this kind of work, and then at a national level, I see this in two ways. One is who gets funded and what gets funded. Now, who gets funded brings us into that whole arena of growing the whole pathway from the undergraduate and even earlier right through to the actual scientific employee, either at a faculty level or industry, doing this important work. The trouble is that at every stage of the transition, we lose people, and we lose more people of color than people of the majority group. And so we need systems in place to actually address that loss. Part of it is mentoring, but a huge part of it is changing the culture within these institutions that creates that sense of not belonging that I myself have experienced, that turns people off. They take a look and they say, well, all very well, but I'm not going to go into this field. So we've got to be dealing with that. And to deal with that appropriately, the institutions where these people are developed are mainly the academic institutions. They really need to take a firm grip on this and come up with a system-based approach to changing the culture. And we know what works. We have to have equity. We have to have measurement of diversity inclusion metrics. And most importantly, we have to hold leaders accountable. We have to tie those behaviors to the institutional reward systems so that at the end, we're having even more of people of color, particularly Black Americans, moving into these positions that are so important for innovation. Now, in addition to that, we have to monitor this problem of the individually experienced racism that in fact also contributes to turning people off. You will all remember that 2 years ago, the world was ablaze with sexual harassment, and many of these institutions have buckled down with systems in place to monitor, diagnose, and prevent harassment. Now, I would argue that exactly those same sort of tight systems are needed to address this racism that we see. And then finally, and equally important, is the what that gets funded for research. The reason that is that it directly addresses the health disparities, but also, as it turns out, more people of color are drawn towards health disparities research. And in order to be able to accomplish this goal, we have to be funding more of that. There's been a lot of alluding to the NIH gap, racial gap in funding, and meaning that the percentage of awards that are made relative to the applicant pool is lower for African American applicants than any others. Now, that is correct, and we should correct those gaps, and there's work going on to do that. But even when we correct that gap, because the number of applicants is so small, it won't make a big difference. So we have to find ways of building up those numbers of people who are going to be applying for those awards. And that means actually building the number of people that are graduating with PhDs and postdoctoral and building the numbers of faculty. And again, this circulates right back to building this culture of inclusion where people can feel a sense of belonging. And I can guarantee you any institution that begins to do that aggressively will be able to change things very rapidly within a short period of time. And indeed, I saw that myself happen in the NIH intramural program, where the percentage of tenure-track investigators who are Black and from underrepresented groups has really dramatically improved over 5 years through strategies like cohort hiring. So I was up there. There's a lot to be said in this space, but I want to give the chance to others to speak. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Valentine. I think having you at NIH and addressing these key issues has been so important. Dr. Mejia, I'd like to ask you next, what can we do today to close the gaps of investment, very specifically in neglected diseases?
So I think the first part would be to bring more a notification, to bring more notice to the understanding of how many people actually have the neglected diseases, because I really think that there's a dearth of, not an unwillingness, but there's definitely this perception that these neglected diseases happen elsewhere, not in our country, that these happen south of us, that these happen in places that have a systemic poverty. But the first thing would be to bring more information, to do more studies. I think that's critical, so we can show these are the levels, these are the prevalences of parasites that we see in places like Alabama. Then the second part would be the research would have to go to bring it to a modern scale, and that's what we do at Baylor. So we don't use the old-fashioned microscopy. We actually use molecular diagnostics. That's well established as the modern way of detecting any disease, viruses, bacteria, fungi. So we brought that innovation to parasitology and also neglected diseases. So it would have to be this two-pronged approach where more surveillance and then also using modern techniques. And then also I would agree with Dr. Valentine, and there would be we need to have more people of color in our field, because there definitely seems to be a turnoff of going into this type of studies or this type of science, because there's lots to do in cardiology, there's lots to do in endocrinology, there's lots to do in cancer research. Or someone would say that's a dead field because we don't have those diseases here in the United States. But I'm here to say that we do, and they're actually a big problem.
Thank you. So, Ulili, we would like to give you a magic wand in the venture capital world to address both what Dr. Valentine and Dr. Mejia have brought up. How would you address these inequities, and who is in the funding, who is in the research, and how we bring neglected diseases to the forefront?
Yeah, so I think the first step, and I will take that magic wand, the first step is measuring, for the limited partners or the people who give the venture capitalists their money, if they require to see the diversity of the founders that those VCs are investing in. I feel like that will make a huge difference, requiring to see those diversity numbers, as well as setting mandates that they have to improve those numbers year over year in order for them to receive investment into their next fund. For us, our big thing is you measure what matters. And thus far, VCs haven't been held accountable for creating those diverse portfolios. And as Dr. Valentine mentioned, when we started holding individuals accountable for creating safe workplaces where you could be free of sexual harassment, then we started seeing those institutional changes happen. So one, LPs holding those VCs accountable, two, seeing more inflow of cash into those systems. For us, for the first time, we're actually going out and we're fundraising for our Fund 3 in order to have more capital to disperse to those entrepreneurs at the earliest stages. So, it can't just be us alone, though. We need to see other VCs increase the amount of capital that they deploy. And then to Dr. Mejia's point, a program that I learned of fairly early at my time at Fuqua was created by Dr. Ridley around giving vouchers for those who are developing drugs for orphan diseases. So that voucher system would allow, either the creator of the drug could utilize it for one of their other drugs that they would make more money on, or they could sell it to another pharmaceutical company to kind of fast track them on the FDA process. We haven't really seen that much usage of that voucher program. So if we could see more usage, more cooperation with the FDA to help incentivize the creation of drugs, and then the creating a similar voucher system for the creation of technology to address those disease states that have been traditionally underfunded and under-researched, then I think that, that can help bring everything into alignment. And lastly, to Dr. Valentine's point, it definitely does start at the beginning stages. And so making sure that we have more support systems so individuals not only, start in science careers, but also are encouraged to continue. So for us, we believe that there is a pipeline problem in terms of who is entering the sciences. So Kapor Capital is a proud supporter of the SMASH program, our Summer Math and Science Honors Academy. But we don't stop at making sure there's folks going through the pipeline, but we also make sure that folks have access to those careers in science, in medicine, in technology once they complete their college as well as graduate school education.
Thank you. These are excellent concrete steps that we can all take today. I really appreciate you expressing them. But Dr. Valentine, I want to come back to you in a very sensitive issue that's around researching drugs that take into account either genetic differences or biological differences versus the social factors that can also create disparities. Can you comment on this and how we move forward with open discussion in this area?
Yeah, that's a very important issue. And I think underscoring all of that, we must never view it as one or the other. To get a comprehensive view of what's going on, we must deeply understand the social determinants of health because of the incontrovertible associations that we see of poorer outcomes in certain groups compared to others. Take my own tiny little field. I'm a cardiologist, but within cardiology, I focus on cardiac transplantation and more generally in organ transplantation. And in every single organ transplant field, African-American outcomes are worse than those compared to other groups. And so it's important I've been really energized to ask the question, why? And to understand why, I can't simply look at genetic reasons. I must look at that, including all of the other social determinants of health, and then put all that information together. And I say all this because I think that going forward, what all scientists, even the very basic of scientists, should be doing should be casting this diversity and equity lens on the work that they do. If you're doing in cell culture, do you know what the source is? What are the cell lines, racial origins of the cell lines that you're working on? And in the same way, are you collaborating with people in your institutions who really know the methodologies around studying health disparities? We must try and integrate the two. Jumping right into the genetic causes, I think, is a mistake. But I think that knowing about the genetic causes and using genomic tools can actually result in perhaps better treatments. For example, the new approaches to cholesterol-lowering agents, which were found because of a focus on the differences in the PCSK9 pathway for African American people, has now resulted in a drug that is very powerful, not only for African Americans, but for everybody. So it is a sensitive issue, to having the lens that we must always be asking the question of what is the racial equity issue here in one's research, looking in the mirror, and then bringing together the various fields that will ultimately create much better health for Black and brown people, but also for the whole of the population as well.
Thank you so much for tackling a really hard question, but giving light to the right way to approach it. We really appreciate that. Ulili, I did want to come to you next. The Orphan Drug Act of 1983 has been a great breakthrough. It has its imperfections, but it is successful incentivizing certain types of drug development. Is there an opportunity for similar types of legislation to help correct some of the disparities in drug development in our discussion today as well?
Yeah, so what the act that I mentioned earlier, or basically it's a priority review voucher program that was created in 2007. And so it entitles the bearer, you receive the voucher basically after, as part of creating a treatment for neglected disease. And that allows you to kind of speed through the process. And so you get a regulatory review. I think it cuts it in half. So it goes from 12 months to 6 months or so. And so, as I mentioned, I feel like there is definitely a need to have that program advertised more. I feel like in its initial phases, it did get uptake, but we haven't really seen it as much, and we haven't seen as many pharmaceutical companies take advantage of it. And then on my end, I primarily invest in medical devices. So having something similar on the medical device side. So for instance, I know, Vice President-elect Harris has highlighted, maternal care as one of her key focus issues, especially among Black women. I currently sit on the board of Bloom Life. They're currently in the FDA process. And so that, we've seen that maternal outcomes for Black women they're horrendous, right? So we would like to improve them. They have been in this FDA review process going on a year, and in my mind, it makes me wonder how many mothers could have had better pregnancy outcomes, a better pregnancy experience if they had access to that technology even earlier. So as part of the new administration's goal could be, let's take a look at the FDA system, the process in its entirety. How can we create innovation within that government system to help us get access to the drugs, help us get access to the medical devices, the treatments that we need and that the community needs at a more accelerated rate, and then help provide those financial incentives. I think we did that for the COVID vaccine. The government provided a huge amount of capital to help with the acceleration of developing a vaccine there. So what if we kind of put that same focus into these other disease states, type 2 diabetes, other asthma, things that have been plaguing this nation for so long, provided those same financial incentives to the companies, to the upcoming pharmaceutical companies, med device companies, and then also provided them a path to make sure that their technology could go to market a lot faster. I know that the administration has said that healthcare is going to be their number one priority, and so I just hope, that actually is the case. And then secondarily, I would say also revising, what treatments are covered, which prescription drugs are covered, which care is covered, so that, members of the community then have access to these breakthrough technologies and breakthrough drugs.
Thank you so much. It's a stark reminder of what we can do. We put our minds to it watching the COVID vaccine today. I love that you want to take that same force and address the inequities we're discussing today. I did want to invite the audience. We know there are so many people with questions today in the audience. Please put them in the chat so that we can get to them today. We really do want to know what you need to know to carry action forward today after this discussion. Priti, I'd like to invite you back in and ask if you can tell us, we have the newly elected Biden-Harris administration and Congress, and how are they going to help us address these issues? Are there federal policy proposals that can be advanced quickly that can help us get this ball rolling?
Hi, Maisha. Yeah, definitely. I tried to touch on some of them in the presentation. For me, top of mind is the proposed legislation on neglected diseases. I think it's so important. I think that with, a relatively small investment, I think we could make huge gains for neglected diseases in our country. I also brought forward the IDEA Act, which is based on Dr. Lisa Cook's research for the Patent Office to start to improve the situation we have where women and people of color actually are really underrepresented in the patent system. So I think it's a matter also of the heads of different agencies, for example, the PTO or the FDA, really prioritizing equity and seeking out experts like the ones on the panel to ask them about the way forward.
Thank you. And Dr. Mejia, I'd like to also invite you to answer this question with us as well.
So there have been some strides. So we have this new Cory Booker back in, it was October 2019. Senator Booker from New Jersey passed or proposed this STOP, which is basic acronym for stopping tropical diseases in the U.S. And I think because of COVID, the STOP stands for Study, Treat, Observe, and Prevent Neglected Diseases of Poverty Act, and it goes hand in hand with not just the prevalence of parasites or tropical diseases in the U.S., but the reasons to have them, and the reasons why you can really boil it down to one reason is poverty, because poverty leads to problems with sanitation, problems with food scarcity, and these events cause more risk of tropical diseases or neglected diseases. And so that's what the bill was aiming at. And it really wouldn't be, like Priti said, that much of an investment to really make a huge change and impact in the poorest part of Americans. When I'm talking about the world, of Americans. And so that bill was was introduced. And I think because of COVID, everything's been put on the back burner. But there is some push and momentum about addressing these issues. And I think we just need to keep on going and try to get more and more information and get the ball rolling to bring in more laws and more bills. Thank you.
Thank you. This is such an important question. I'd like each of our panelists to really address it. So, Dr. Valentine, for our newly elected Biden-Harris administration, what federal policies and proposals do you want to see advanced quickly coming right out of the gate to address our conversation today?
Yeah, I agree. Very important question. And on day one, what I hope is that presidential executive order banning the education of systemic racism, critical race theory that was put forth by the previous administration, I would like to see that repealed on day one, because it is critically important that we understand, that everybody in this country understands what is the basis of all of this. Is without the understanding, we can't move forward. I'd also hope that there'll be some policies that incentivize or encourage that within the academic institutions that there is introduced a fourth pillar to which institutions are held accountable. What do I mean by that? Currently at academic centers, there's the three missions: patient care, research, education. That fourth pillar has to be equity and inclusion, and they have to be held accountable to it. So the WMC has strategies for holding institutions accountable, and I think that this pillar of equity and diversity should be made part of the reaccreditation process. And I think that some legislation and some policy at the federal government level would really help for that. Also, there should be policy that addresses the gap, the racial gap in funding. To a certain extent, I believe that some of the agencies have been hamstrung by laws around what can or cannot do, what kinds of recognition can be given to certain groups that are underrepresented. I think some important policy changes could help us close the gap there relatively rapidly. And I would hope that the specific targets would be put in place so that we see an increase in the number of people applying for funding, and we see increases in the funding of health disparities and minority health research. And we can even put a target on it. Right now, it's a very small proportion of the research budget, for example, of the NIH. It's not zero, but it's a small proportion. Let's put a target on it to be at least 25% of that budget. And I think that will help tremendously in moving this agenda forward.
Thank you. I hope everyone's listening that those are very concrete steps, immediate actions that can be taken to really address this conversation today. So, Lily, back to your magic wand with venture capital and the policies you want to see go forward so that you can continue this work. Tell us how we're going to get there with policy urgently.
Yeah, I mean, building on what Dr. Valentine stated, I think it starts from the very beginning. I read recently, they surveyed medical students and asked them if they thought there existed a pain difference in Black patients versus white patients. And I was surprised by how many people said yes, that there does exist a pain difference between the races. And so I feel like by reinstituting these diversity and inclusion training, and even more so, weaving it in throughout the whole curriculum of the medical school, I feel like we can start to make sure that our doctors, our pharmacists, from the beginning have the accurate training, and actually that will then carry on to patient care. And also just touching on, one of the comments in the box is, another policy change. So for us at Kapor Capital, we invest across sectors. Our two biggest sectors are education and healthcare. And we are determined to provide an integrated approach to both of those sectors. And we realize that a lot of times students are unable to learn because they're hungry. Maybe they can't see the board and they haven't been diagnosed with a vision impairment that hasn't been corrected. Maybe they can't hear. Maybe there's other underlying causes. And so many of the technologies or businesses that we invest in are not just like one-off solutions. They're really in addressing across the spectrum. If it's healthcare, it's like, how do we integrate the healthcare services into the schools where most students go so that they then have access to that care? And the same thing on the education side, like, how do we make sure that any early childhood illnesses are diagnosed, especially with autism? We see historically Black students are, less likely to be diagnosed earlier with autism than their white counterparts. So making sure that there are processes in place to help address those. Again, I go back to my earlier experiences, as a child in San Francisco growing up. It was a vision van that first, diagnosed my stigmatism, which helped the teachers identify, like, oh, that's why she's she can't see the board. And once I got my first pair of glasses, it kind of changed things for me academically. But because of budget cuts, on the part of the government, those vision vans, the dental services that used to come out to the schools, those are no longer in existence, and if so, on a very limited basis. So if we can put the funding back into those programs that really help the students and help, the kids who need it the most receive the services, I feel like that's just going to be a game changer for so many people. And so, their parents will stop using the emergency room kind of as their primary care. The students will be able to see clearer. They won't suffer from all these secondary conditions that come as a result of bad dental hygiene. But it really has to be a budgeted imperative on the part of the next administration, and I hope to see it come to fruition.
Thank you for those answers and also for sharing your own personal story. Stay with me. I would like to go in reverse order now and ask you, what is one thing that you would like the audience to take away from today in your closing remarks?
Oh, so is that starting with me?
Yes.
Okay,
Sorry
yeah,
about that.
I'm happy to say. I think the number one thing is you have power. Whether you are a patient, whether you are, the head of a foundation, at the heart of everything that you do, you have power. So to those who are at foundations and deploy money, I really want you to consider, where are you putting your dollars? And making sure that it's going to initiatives that can help these problems, or going to firms that can help, who have committed to addressing these issues. If you are a citizen of the United States, are you voting for leadership that puts this at the top of their priority? Are you advocating to your representatives to make sure that it's at the top of your priority list? And also, as a consumer, which drug companies are you endorsing with your dollars? Where you do have the flexibility, making sure that you're showing them, like, as a consumer, like, hey, we want you to focus here, or hey, we approve of you doing this. But very much in the end, just realizing the power in your actions and making sure that every action you take, that you can create an improvement in this category. You can, advocate to your legislation. You can advocate to corporations. And so for me, at the end of the day, that I do every day is I think, like, how have I made a difference each day? And so I urge everyone in the audience who's listening to this to ask yourself that same question.
Thank you so much. Dr. Valentine, what do you really want the audience to know and take away today?
I would say I would really build on what Yuri just said. Look in the mirror. Look in the mirror and see where the opportunities are to address racism at every turn. And to the leaders who are listening in, look at the organization and be resolved to create a systematic approach to eliminating these inequities. And be assured that these changes can happen rapidly. I often hear people say, oh, well, it's the culture. That will take a long time. No, we're talking about rewarding the right kinds of behaviors, and within short periods of time, you will see change. Be confident in that. And be bold, take those steps, look in the mirror, and correct what is in your rearview mirror.
Thank you so much. Dr. Mejia?
Thank you. So I always like to keep things as simple as possible because we're so busy with everything else and so many ideas. And I would say that when it comes to these problems that I specifically deal with, everything is based on poverty, because poverty leads to social neglect, leads to marginalization and social injustice. And then because of poverty, we have poor sanitation, which leads to neglect to tropical diseases. So it's like a big cycle. As you could say, how can I stop poverty? But if we can find ways of addressing some of these diseases, we could make an impact, not in other countries, but in our own country. And just a small amount of interest and funding, you could really make a huge change in millions of lives in the U.S. So, like I said, for me, it's always simple. It's all about addressing poverty and social injustice. Thank you so much.
Thank you for bringing it back to the most simplest of ideas today. Priti, I'd like to end with you as you began us with a closing remark of what the audience needs to take away today.
I was thinking as I was listening to the speakers that I think we need to bring into the room that Black and Brown people are not just here in the United States. They are all over the world. And I just saw before walking into this panel the maps of where our taxpayer-funded vaccines are going to reach for COVID and who they're going to reach. And the maps just, honestly, they just like broke my heart, because it is continents and countries that are predominantly Black and Brown that are not going to get the vaccines for a very, very, very long time. And so if I was going to ask folks who are listening for one thing, I would just say we as Americans have a responsibility to advocate to our government to make sure that people all over the globe are going to get those vaccines as well, especially since we as taxpayers paid for them. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to really thank the entire panel today for joining us, sharing your expertise, really opening up the conversation and being quite frank and honest about where we are and where we need to go next. We really appreciate all of your expertise and time. With that, I'd like to turn it back to Murray Ross for closing remarks.
Thank you, Maisha, and thanks again to all of our speakers and our panelists for a very, very rich discussion. I just want to remind people in the audience that this event has been recorded. We'll post the videos on the Institute for Health Policy's website in the coming week. That's apihp.org. In addition, Priti Krishtel has agreed to write a blog on the key themes raised today and to lift up some actionable solutions we can take. I won't put her on the spot for the line right now. We're going to be sending you an evaluation. We're very interested in your feedback on this event and on any topics or issues you'd like to see covered in the future. And as I mentioned at the start, this forum is the first in a two-part series. We will hold a second forum in the first quarter of next year, which will delve into issues around clinical trials, access, and affordability. And you can expect to see an invitation to that early next year. With that, we are at time. I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you at the second forum next year. Thanks very much, everyone.